Yes. Oh, now I'm recording. Yes. All right. So as I was saying, this will be a 45 minutes talk regarding KATGUI and how to use it on a Docker container, mostly aimed at Docker beginners and KATGUI front-end developers. So I remember when I got introduced to KATGUI and developing on KATGUI, it was a bit tricky to get everything up and running. So on GitHub under KATGUI, there's a README file that instructs you on how to get started. And I remember this one time, I think I was teamed up with Lebogang, if I'm not mistaken. We were trying to install well, we were trying to develop KATGUI on a machine, and we stumbled upon a number of issues relating from the version of Node.js that was installed, the issues with dependencies regarding Node modules, and it was just a nightmare. And we all know that saying where a lot of developers says, okay, this thing works on my machine. Because when we came to my machine, everything worked 100%. But when we got to Lebohang's machine, then it was a different ballgame. So I think that's then, I think that's when we decided that we should probably containerize KATGUI for further development. And that will obviously ensure that builds are deterministic. If I want to develop KATGUI on my Ubuntu 2004, Ubuntu wouldn't have any problem developing on his Mac. Whoever that uses Windows wouldn't have any problem developing the same application on their Windows device. So I think that's what sparked us into moving the development to Docker. So I'm just going to give you a Docker introduction in the next 10 minutes or less. So in the past, those who, like me, if you remember, in most cases, when you were developing applications, you would develop them in virtual machines. A lot of people, myself included, I play around a lot with Vagrant and Oracle VM. So this simply meant that a lot of people would be developing Vagrant files for deploying applications, which then encapsulates your configurations and your files and all that. This will then obviously ensure that builds are deterministic. But the other thing about VMs is that VMs compose the whole operating system. So this simply means that all the resources on your VMs will be shared across your physical system. So in this image, you will see that I've got a virtual machine A, B, and C. And in essence, all this virtual machine will be running on your infrastructure, sharing all those resources, which in most cases, it can hinder the application's performance and. And the one downside of this, I did mention that you are sharing the system across all these VMs. So for instance, I know for a fact, trying to install Windows 10 on a virtual machine would take you not less than 10 gig. And most systems these days, they require 2 CPUs or maybe 4 gigs. So you could just imagine if those resources are being taken from your system, then your system is not going to be functional. So in essence, this then becomes expensive. You would imagine if you are running multiple systems or websites, in essence, in virtual machines, each website would have its own virtual machine on the infrastructure, then this just becomes extremely expensive. And I did mention that the resource utilization, you can see on your screen, here I've got one virtual machine running on Oracle VM. And in this VM, I've given it like 4 gigs RAM and 4 CPUs, and just by that, it's already taking about 7 gigs of space. So you would imagine if we were to develop, well, if we were to eliminate the need for installing KATGUI in your system and instead replacing it with the virtual box with vagrant configurations, this will ultimately take someone's resources, an average of 7 gigs, and probably high memory. So that's what then introduced the need for containerization. And for those who don't know, Docker is one of the leading containerization application out there in the market. And if not everyone uses it. I know for a fact Kubernetes dropped it a few years ago, but most people are using Docker and its other application products. So Docker is a set of platform as a service that uses operating system level visualization. This simply means that it doesn't use the hypervisor. The hypervisor just sits between your infrastructure and your virtual machine. So this is the thing that manages your virtual machine and resources. So in essence, Docker, you don't need, it doesn't use a hypervisor. So it utilizes the same resources as your host. And it removes the need of that thing whereby a developer will end up saying this thing now works on my machine. And disk allocation is very minimal. It's very easy to scale. For instance, you can use Docker Swarm to scale it horizontally and have multiple applications running on the same host without chowing a lot of your resources. And then the other nice thing about it, it offers very easy dependency management. So you can manage your dependencies very easily, and it's highly portable. By that, I mean that I can build it on my Ubuntu 2004. I can give the same Docker image to Ubuntu's building it on a Mac. I can give it to someone else who's building the same thing on a Windows device. So that was very cool. And also, most importantly, it's very lightweight as compared to the VMs. It doesn't consume a lot of your resources. So that is just an introduction of Docker. And the other thing about this is that since it doesn't utilize it doesn't use your hypervisor and it just sits on your infrastructure and uses your operating system, then it's much easier to scale. As I mentioned, as you can see on this image, you can just easily see an application A, B, C, D till F that is horizontal scaled. This then offers multiple containerization without hogging your system. And the nice thing about it, all these applications are all isolated from each other. So for them to communicate between each other, you're gonna have to create your own network and then have them communicate. And mention that they are isolated. So the operating system, it's isolated. And other nice thing about it, as compared to virtual machines, if you've worked with the virtual machine, you will remember that it's another copy of your operating system. So depending on your resources and how intensive the application is, it might take a very long time to boot and for the application to get to a running state. And as compared to containerized applications, hit of a button, then you have your application running with minimum system resources. So that's the other nice thing about Docker. And you might be wondering, how does this Docker thing actually work and how it's architectured? So it's easily divided into 3 things: the client, the host, and in most cases, the registry. So Docker itself is built on a client server model. And Docker client communicates with the Docker daemon in the background, which this Docker daemon is used to build and run your images. And yeah, so they use their own low-level APIs and so on and so forth. If you really want to get to the bottom of understanding the Docker architecture, I added a link there. Anyone is welcome to go check it out. And the other thing is Docker, not recently, but it introduced Docker Compose. It's another Docker client. And the nice thing about Docker Compose, it offers you a multi-container management as compared to the normal Docker. Docker offers an individual container management. But yeah, we'll go into that. So Docker for application packaging just consists of 3 key components. And these 3 components are required for you to get up and running with Docker and your application. So these are your Docker files, your Docker image, and public or private registry. For CAM, we use our private registry, which is hosted on this URL. So that's where we build and push our images. And Dockerfile is just a set of instructions. It's just a file containing a set of instructions that are used to create a Docker image. And each instruction is just an operation used to package that application. An example would be installing dependencies, becoming a different user, changing directories, and running your applications. And the nice thing about this is that Docker, it's multi-layered. By that, I mean, every instruction executes in its own layer. And the nice thing about that is that all the layers are cached. So if there isn't been any new updates on a single layer, then it doesn't have to run it again. An example would be pulling an image from Docker registry. So suppose an image, it's like 500 megs. If you pull it once, you don't have to pull it multiple times. It stays there until you decide to change the version. Obviously, then the new version will be pulled. Similarly with files, if a file hasn't been changed on your local environment and you want to copy it to your container, if it hasn't been changed, then it won't be copied. It only copies anything that is changed. And this gives Docker that thing where it's lightweight and things are just quick to boot up. Hence, I mentioned that it's easier to boot up your application. And now that's where we, okay, I messed up the slides, but it's fine. So, so now that's where we marry KATGUI and Docker. So on your left, you will notice that I've got a Dockerfile. And if you notice on the right, the way to construct a Dockerfile, there's a couple of predefined instructions that are necessary. First of all, you need to have your from instruction. This tells Docker where to get the base image of what you're gonna be basing on. And for KATGUI, the base image that we're using, it's node 10. Don't ask me why we're still using node 10. It just works. So, and also, initially when you run your Docker image, everything works from the root directory. And ideally, you're not supposed to be running in root, let alone running your application as root. But yeah, it is what it is. So what I have next, it's your working directory. So I mentioned that you don't want to be running in root. So we change the directory to this app root where we're gonna copy our dependencies over. So you will notice that in line 8, I'm copying the package.json and the yarn lock files to that directory in the container. This is gonna be used to run installation your NPM installations. There's your package dependencies. And the other thing that we do, we need to expose the listening port to port 8000. This is the port that you're going to access your application in from your local host. And obviously then install some dependencies. For KATGUI, we use gulp for building and for running our web server and building the dependencies. By dependency, I mean the dist files. So we use gulp in that version. So that is our Dockerfile. So I mentioned that Docker. Sorry.
If you go back, can I quickly ask a question?
Oh, yes.
It's just at line 1 from node 10. How does Docker actually identify, I mean, that what is node and version 10? Does that mean if you just say from node, it just goes to the registry of Docker and search what is it, which is named node, and then it extracts that for you? Is that what is happening?
You are 100% correct. Yeah. So what happens is, since here you haven't really defined a Docker registry. So from this instruction, it will understand it as it will try to search it from the public registry. And if it does find it from the public registry, then it will download the whatever base image that you've labeled here, and then the version. So if you do go to, let me just quickly go here. If you go to hub.docker, when it does want me to get to it, you will notice that there's a couple of images, and node is one of them. And this is an official image. And it does offer multiple tags. Multiple tags just simply means it's multiple versions of that image. So you will see that there's a list of different versions, your Alpine being the very smallest, and so on and so forth. So what it does, like you just said, it just pulls the version that you've mentioned, that you've highlighted, that you've added here as Docker 10, and just pulls it from Docker registry. Yes. You will notice in some of our images, not our private images, you will notice that it will be pointing to our chem Docker registry instead of the public. But okay. So sorry.
So when you are pointing to our registry, do you have another syntax that you have to do there, or do you just simply write where our registry is?
Yes, you simply write where our registry is and the name of the model of the image. So in essence, you will just say, let me just go back. We'll just say Docker registry, ChemLab, blah, 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 KATGUI or node :10. Then it will instead pull from Docker Hub. It will just pull from our local registry.
And if our local registry is down, does it go to the main one, the public one?
In essence, if you haven't configured it to do that, it won't, but you can easily configure that under Docker. I think it's docker.json, it's under etc. You can configure some mirrors, what we call mirrors, such that if it fail pulling from our private, then the fallback will be public. But obviously, if our image doesn't reside in the public repository, then it will ultimately fail. But if an image also does reside in the public, then it will be pulled.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Sure. So earlier on, I mentioned that Docker was introduced, and then thereafter, the same people, they introduced Docker Compose. So there is the only difference between the two is that Docker mostly works with individual applications. So you would only use it for individual applications, and then now enters Docker Compose, which is used for maintaining and running multiple containers. And this can be seen with the recent move from monolithic applications to microservices. So you might have noticed that the world in tech is moving from a big, huge application where it's being shipped as one into simple pieces of applications that are regarded as microservices, and they intercommunicate between each other. So that's where Docker Compose comes in. And you can notice on your right, I have a Docker Compose, which is residing in KATGUI. And in this Docker Compose, I have defined a few items. In line 3, I'm defining one microservice, which is the KATGUI. This is just the web server that's running KATGUI. In another microservice, microcontainer, whatever you want to call it, it's a different container. I've defined a distribution. So in this container, we will only do a gulp build, which simply generates all our dist files for deployment. And the web server simply means, as it says, it's just a web server. But in essence, Docker Compose, it's easier to implement since everything is written in YAML, and it's easier to run and so on and so forth, as compared to just running your Docker builds, your Docker files using Docker build command. But okay, anyways, move forward. And one might wonder, why do we need to use Docker Compose instead of just normal Docker? I mentioned that Docker CLI is just used to manage a single container, whereas Docker Compose manages multiple containers. And it's very easy to configure through YAML. As you can see on the left, we have defined our service and our services. And then in our services, we got two services, a KATGUI service and dist service. In KATGUI, we have this alias, which is KATGUI common. So this simply just tells us that whatever that we are doing in this KATGUI service, we also want to replicate some of it in our dist service. So in our dist service, we also want to change the user to the first Linux user. We also want to mount our current directory to that app directory in the container. We want to expose port 8000 to the port in the container. And finally, we want to run a command, a bash command that simply installs the application and then runs the web server. So this is going to
Mpo, can I ask?
Oh, yes.
What is sitting there inside the app directory? Now,
so what is sitting there in the app directory at the moment would be only the package.json and the yarn lock. So that's what would be sitting in that directory. And what we then do in here, since we have mounted our current working directory to the app, then it just makes it a lot more simpler for us to be running whatever application that is running on our local. So you would, in essence, you would make changes on your local, and then these changes will be reflected on your container. I hope that helps. And the same.
Mpo,
yes.
Sorry, man. If you are having a lot of services or applications or microservices that you want to run, so you put them all in the Docker Compose file like that?
Yes, 100%. So you would define an additional service somewhere down here would be, I don't know, but currently now there's only KATGUI for the web server.
If I do cat portal,
you can do cat portal down here with its own commands, as long as it's using the same image that it's being used by everyone else. Alternatively, you can define your own image. Instead, what I have here, I have build, which simply tells Docker that I want to build the image that is there in my current directory. And that image would be this Dockerfile. If you want your KAT portal, you would then define your image for KAT portal to use in here if you don't want to use the same image as KATGUI. So you're gonna define multiple of services in your Docker Compose files.
And the parameters on your left, they are always the same for every micro app that you want to add, or you see the build and container name and user volumes. Are they always the same? Is this standard for Docker?
Yes, that is standard for Docker Compose. As I mentioned, that it uses YAML, which is a key value type of environment where everything that you see on your left is pre-configured by Docker. Obviously, the service name is what you give it, and everything after on the right-hand side is what you want to configure. So if you are unsure, I've linked this link down here, and you can find all the necessary information there. So yeah, what was that? So I did mention that we have two services. We have the web server, and we've got the one that is used to generate the dist files. And obviously, for the sake of not using the same namespace, you need to, I defined the container name to KATGUI and then also dist files, just to isolate the confusion. So that is with Docker Compose. And, past here. So I mentioned the benefits and also security. Since all of these services are kind of isolated, then it gives you some sort of security that at least there's some security since it's isolated. And the nice thing about it, you have a single Docker Compose. As Gati mentioned, you can also add another different microservice for running KAT portal. This just simply makes it easy for a single host system to run multiple different containers. And this is very high productivity since it refuses the time it takes to, I made a typo. It uses the time to take, the time it takes to perform tasks is very minimal. And for building and running our Dockerized application, yes.
If you go to the last slide, yes, thank you. Since you are having two different, let me say, containers or microservices.
Let's work with containers.
Containers, yeah, which is the dist file as well as the KATGUI one. So does that mean that you could choose to deploy a specific container, which is the dist file container, and not build the KATGUI container?
Yes, I'll get to that. Yes, I'll get to that. In short,
okay.
Yes. I'll get to that in the few slides. So in essence, the way one would be able to run KATGUI on a Docker container, you would just easily need to run Docker Compose up, and you want it to build KATGUI. Why KATGUI? Because you've defined KATGUI as your service. So for the dist, obviously we'll just say dist, and then it's gonna run your dist. But for the sake of KATGUI, this will build your KATGUI. And since I ran this previously, so since this was run before and nothing has changed, it's quick and easy to run the application since it doesn't have to download the image, it doesn't have to mount volumes, it doesn't have to expose or let alone install packages. So this just makes it a lot more easier and quick to deploy. I'll just quickly show you a demo when I'm done. And as you can see, in the end, it did a yarn install, and then it's running our web server, and you can see it here on your right. So that is easier deterministic builds on different systems using Docker with KATGUI. And as mentioned to Anele, you would also use a different container or service name for building your dist files that you are going to use to deploy KATGUI. So as you can see, again, it doesn't have to re-download or reinstall anything. The only thing that it does, it's just installs and builds your dist files. And as you can see in here, it shows that some things have been changed. Obviously, the time of the files have been deleted and some files have been modified. Yeah. And obviously, for some people like myself, you having to memorize all these commands just makes it a lot more worse. Because at the top of that, you need to memorize your passwords, you need to memorize people's cell phone numbers and names and stuff. Now you need to memorize commands such as this. It becomes a little bit cumbersome. So that's why we introduce makefiles. I think I gave a talk last time regarding makefiles. So in here, in KATGUI, we use makefiles. So in your makefiles, there's different things that you can do. There's different targets, such as Bootstrap. This will just install Docker if you don't have it. Then it will run KATGUI's web server and then open KATGUI or on Google Chrome. And the one I mostly use when I'm playing with KATGUI would just be make, run, detach, and view the KATGUI. So the nice thing about makefiles, you can run them respectively, simultaneously. No, respectively. Yes, respectively, English. So what I mean is that you can just say, okay, now I want to develop KATGUI. I've got this ticket that requires me to play on GUI. And what I want to do is to have the GUI on my side and maybe your VS Code or whatever that you use to develop on the other side. What you just need to run would be make, run, detached, and view KATGUI. This will build your KATGUI container and put it in the background. -d just simply tells you that it's detaching, so it's going to the background. This then offers you to do other things, such as launching your browser and also your IDE for development. And then you can just continue developing on your local, and then it will just reflect within your container. So yes, I think that's it. That's it.
Yeah. But does it auto refresh immediately after you save on the your IDE?
I don't. Yes.
Or is there anything? Because
I don't think it does not.
The old way of doing KATGUI, it's like if you are changing if I have opened my JavaScript and or any HTML, like I'm updating something there and I just save it, immediately auto refresh on the web. I mean on the
yes.
So does it do that also?
100%. 100%. It does. So whatever you develop on your whatever you develop on your local environment, it's gonna be replicated on your container. So if I change something here, it's gonna be shown on your GUI. Maybe let me just show a simple demo. GUI. So I can just say make run. View. This should open the thing after 5 seconds. And it does not work. Yay. Hey, I see it's having fun. MTA is having fun. Okay, it does not work. I don't know why.
It sorry if I may interject.
Yes,
it depends on what command you're running. So if the command you're running is like a development command where you have reload or whatever option there is to hot refresh, if that command does that, then it will refresh.
Oh yeah, yes. That, and also the fact that sleeping for 5 seconds was not enough. I needed to sleep for a longer period of time, because then there's things happening in the background and the GUI hasn't been updated, up to date. So this is what you have, and then you would then do your development on the side. You have that, you would change stuff. I don't know what to change. Change your about, who's about. What should I change? Give me an idea. GUI people. I don't usually work on GUI, so. But yeah, GUI. Do that, do change. I don't know where's the about.
And I think anyone to mount directly to.
So yeah, that's this lunch and learn. I'm gonna try to share the presentation so that the people that actually work with this stuff can find all these resources easier. And yeah, in essence, if you don't want to check out the spreadsheet, I think that the docs are quite up to date with regards to how to run everything. So yeah, you're welcome to enjoy. So yeah, thank you. If there's any questions, I will take them now.
And Ale's just warming up his lunch quick.
Yeah.
This is actually powerful, actually. Thanks very much for this. I will, when I get a moment, I will actually test it and see if I can be able to use Docker developing KATGUI. I'm one of the people who used to do KATGUI, but just mainly on my laptop. I've never used like develop KATGUI using Docker. So it's very valuable to see that you can do this. And one thing which is always a problem is that when you're getting a new laptop or when you're having another laptop, now it's very difficult to even do KATGUI. You want your old laptop to kind of start developing.